It means that people in Germany can change their legal sex and first name simply by submitting a declaration at the registry office. The name and sex only need to accord with the person's subjective gender identity, and the person must understand the implication of the change. Welcome to the LGB Alliance USA News Roundup for the week ending in November 1st, 2024. We all hope you had a happy Halloween. We are here with Carol and me, Ariane. First, a summary of today's news. Susie Green starts a new company to sell puberty blockers. Former CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch, Mike Jeffries, and his partner Matthew Smith have been arrested on sex trafficking charges. A West Texas town passes a sex-based bathroom law. Trans-identified male prisoner Barbie Kardashian is acquitted of all charges in Ireland. The University of Reno's female volleyball players persist in their protest forfeit. And Germany's new self-ID law sparks criticism and protests around the globe. Let's start with you, Carol.
Thanks, Ariane. So Susie Green starts a new company to sell puberty blockers. Oh boy, Susie. So according to Benjamin Ryan on X and The Times, the former chief executive of Mermaids, Susie Green, has founded a company offering access to puberty blockers. In 2022, Susie Green was dismissed as Mermaid's chief executive. According to a Charity Commission report, she was dismissed over a loss of trust in her leadership. In 2023, Susie Green set up Ann Trans Healthcare, which offers puberty blockers to youth under 18 years old. Ann Trans Healthcare was founded by Green and the entrepreneur and HIV campaigner Lizzie Jordan, who also set up LGBT youth support organization Think to Speak. On Ann's website, they state that they provide, quote, evidence-based and gender-affirming care for transgender people of all ages, end quote. Patients aged under 18 need the support of a parent, or a guardian to access their services, according to the website, with a quote standard youth membership cost of £150 per month, as well as a one-off £200 fee. And Trans Healthcare claims that it has secured a legal route to puberty blockers for Britons. The UK banned the sale and supply of puberty blockers following the CAS review, which found a significant lack of evidence to support the safety and necessity of these drugs on children. And Trans Healthcare claims on their website that patients can get prescribed puberty blockers from doctors outside the UK and sent to an EU destination for pickup. Susie Green has stated, quote, the CAS review is a politically driven piece of research launched by a conservative government with an ideological agenda, end quote. Next story here. Former CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch, Mike Jeffries, and his partner Matthew Smith have been arrested on sex trafficking charges. On Tuesday, Mike Jeffries, Matthew Smith, and their associate James Jacobson were indicted on over a dozen counts related to sex trafficking by a federal grand jury in the Eastern District of New York. According to news reports, the alleged crimes happened between December 2008 and March 2015, when Jeffries was CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch. Jeffries and his associates would allegedly bring the men who expressed the desire to become models to Abercrombie and Fitch to sex parties, where the men would be given drugs, alcohol, and Viagra, then made to perform sex acts. The three men will be arraigned in the Eastern District of New York at a later date. And if any further developing news comes up on that, we'll definitely cover it. Last story here for me. West Texas town passes sex-based bathroom laws. In a 5-2 vote, the city of Odessa, Texas, passed an ordinance that expanded an already existing city law from 1989 that prohibits people from entering restrooms of the opposite sex. Under the amended ordinance, the city can seek fines of up to $500 and trespassing charges if a person of the opposite sex uses a restroom that matches their gender identity as opposed to their actual sex. The new terms also allow individuals to sue and seek no less than 10,000 in damages plus the cost of the lawsuit and attorney's fees. The law applies to any building, facility, or space owned, leased in or controlled by the city. As of now, there are 11 states that have similar bathroom bills, although the state of Texas does not have one. Um, I personally believe that it's important to ask questions when these laws go through. And one of the questions to be asked is, how are they going to implement this law? Um, this has been, this is a little something that I'm curious about, because since the state of Texas does not have this law and you can change your ID in the state of Texas, I don't know how they're going to implement this, but it's sad that they have to try. Anyways, that's my stories. Carry on.
Thank you, Carol. Excellent points. So first, we'll turn to sports. Recently, we discussed the University of Nevada at Reno's women's volleyball team becoming the fifth team to announce their decision to forfeit their match against San Jose State due to San Jose State's inclusion of a trans-identified male player. Despite Reno's team decision, the University of Nevada said the game would go forward, although they would not discipline any players for forfeiting. However, now we are reporting that the forfeit was made official on October 26th when not enough Reno players showed up for the match, and so they had no choice but to cancel the game. And apparently, some interesting things went on behind the scenes, according to reporting from Dan Zakshevsky from Outkick. Apparently, after their vote to forfeit, the players and coaching staff met with Nevada Athletics Director Stephanie Rempe and Deputy Athletics Director Marlena Aitken Smith. Now, team captain Sia Lely claimed the team had intended to read a statement they drafted to the administration to explain their thoughts. However, Rempe, the athletics director, refused to listen and instead lectured the team about how they needed to get educated and hear the other side. Rempe is also alleged to have told the team that they could face legal consequences for their decision, though she denied that she intended it as a threat. Meanwhile, on October 30th, Outkick also reported that San Jose State demanded money from two other teams that forfeited, Utah State and Boise State. One email from San Jose State's athletic director to Boise State's athletic director specifically cites harms to San Jose State's brand and lost revenue from the forfeited match. San Jose State confirmed to Outkick that it requested $1,250 from both Boise and Utah State for lost revenue. On top of all of this, Quillette obtained a Title IX complaint written by San Jose State University women's volleyball associate head coach Melissa Batty Smoose. According to Jonathan Kay, writing for Quillette, quote, on 29th of October, Batty Smoose filed a 33-page sworn declaration with officials at SJSU, the Mountain West Conference, and the National Collegiate Athletics Association, that is the NCAA, exhorting these bodies to investigate, one, the overt favoritism that she believes her school has showed to Fleming, that is the trans-identified male player on the SJSU team, at the expense of Fleming's 18 female teammates, and two, the unsettling measures that San Jose State University officials have allegedly taken in order to suppress expressions of concerns from these affected women. Unquote. The way I see it, this whole mess, namely administrators and players speaking over each other, universities passing the buck of responsibility, is all a consequence of the NCAA's and government's absurd policies allowing males on female sports teams. When the rules are unfair to women, women will refuse to play by them, and when people don't play, intercollegiate sports breaks down. Once again, we call on the NCAA and politicians to step in to protect single-sex sports and stop this madness. And we'll keep you updated if there are further developments in this San Jose State saga. Next, we're going to turn to Ireland, where Barbie Kardashian was found not guilty of all charges. For those of you not familiar with this case, Barbie Kardashian is a trans identified male who is incarcerated in a women's prison in Limerick, Ireland, and made threats to kill and harm a fellow inmate and a prison guard. Now, we're not going to repeat all the threats that Kardashian is reported to have said, as they are quite graphic in nature and include threats of sexual violence. But we will offer links in the description that go into greater detail in case you are curious. Now, what's interesting is that during the trial, Kardashian did not deny that he said these things. Instead, he argued that he did not actually intend to carry these threats out, but was motivated by a fit of rage after rumors spread that he left the showers unclean. And the jury agreed that Kardashian's threats were unserious and acquitted him of 3 counts, after which the judge instructed the jury to acquit him of a 4th count. I'd argue this acquittal doesn't mitigate the absurdity of putting a male in a woman's prison, especially one who is convicted of threatening to rape, torture, and murder his mother in 2022, and on top of that, had 15 previous convictions. Kardashian's an unhinged person, a threat, and placing him in a women's facility was playing with fire. Now, elsewhere in Europe, Germany's Gender Self Determination Act came into effect today. That is November 1st. This is, in effect, a self ID law. It means that people in Germany can change their legal sex and first name simply by submitting a declaration at the registry office. The name and sex only need to accord with the person's subjective gender identity, and the person must understand the implication of the change. This repeals an earlier law that required 2 expert opinions before someone can legally change their sex. The act also bans from disclosing without consent another person's previously recorded sex or birth name. So, what are the implications of this? All of this will make it very hard to gather accurate sex-based data, for example, crime statistics. It would also make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to organize according to biological birth sex and safeguard women in need of single-sex only facilities. Indeed, we shouldn't even have to say biological birth sex, because sex is by definition based in biology and fixed at birth. By allowing you to change legal sex, it's conflating sex and gender, which in effect writes sex, which is defined by biology, out of the law. If this isn't worrying enough, consider how the law handles minors. Minors under 14 can have their sex and name legally changed when their guardian declares on their behalf. And minors 14 and older can declare their name and sex changes with their guardian's consent, or, in the absence of their guardian's consent, family court judge approval. This makes it far easier for parents to trans their kids, even young kids, and it also happens to make it harder for parents to safeguard their kids, and kids who are 14 or over don't even necessarily need to get their guardian's consent if they can get this court order. All in all, this is a lot of bad news for helping children deal with gender dysphoria in ways that are actually healthy and respect their biological sex. Transing kids at that young of an age, that's very worrying. And this is just another example of a step actually being taken backwards rather than forwards by a country on this issue. And as it turns out, the law is already sparking international outcry. Reem Al-Salam, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, criticized the law on October 30th, having previously written to the German government in protest in June. It should be noted that in her June statement, Al-Salam pointed out, amongst other things, how lesbians faced sexual coercion from trans-identified males. Additionally, protests are scheduled for today, for Friday, November 1st, in Germany and German consulates around the world, encouraged by the call to action from the German group Initiative Lasst Frauen sprechen. The first protest kicked off in New Zealand with the organization Speak Up for Women New Zealand, and they're continuing today in Europe and the Americas. So, great job to everyone who organized and participated in these protests. So, Carol, what do you think about all this stuff going on in Germany?
Well, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I'll ask the question. Um, how easy is it for people to change it back?
I think it's quite easy. I haven't looked at the I read someone was telling me about this before, but there's like a certain number of times in a year you can change it.
Okay, because
It's not
what
like a one-time thing.
Yeah, because what I heard previously, and it's been a few years, but I did know some lesbians who detransitioned in Germany. They transitioned in Germany, detransitioned, and it was almost impossible for them to get their name and gender marker changed back to the factual, name and sex.
That's interesting. Yeah, because the old law said you had to get two experts to testify on your behalf to change it. So I could easily see a detransitioner having a hard time
Yeah.
finding experts that will testify for their detransition.
Yeah, right. Okay. So maybe that was the issue. All I know is it seemed like the hardest place in the world to get it changed back. That was my thing. So that was why I wondered, okay, well, they made it easier to get it, or is it just as easy to change it back?
Well, that's actually now that you bring it up, that's an interesting dilemma with, when you make it harder to legally change. You make it hard to legally change sex, then you make it hard to legally change it back. I had
Hmm.
to, yeah.
But the other thing too is this just goes back to we have to legal documents should be factual. End of story. It doesn't matter anything. They should be factual for many reasons. Um, but we've already seen this the way this law works in the states, right? Some states have this law. California, for example, where we both live, has self ID. It's a complete disaster. It's a mess.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. I have not tried to do this in California, but is the process to change your legal sex in California, is it basically like how I described the German law that you can just go in?
Yeah, you can just go into the DMV if you want your driver's license or state ID, and you just tell them. You don't just tell them you want to change it. That's it.
Okay. And what if you want to like can you change your birth certificate so easily or
Now, you used to be able to. I think you still can, but for some reason in California, they made it harder to change it back because I tried to change mine back and I have to like jump through a whole bunch of hoops to do it. And they actually won't change it back. They're just going to do an amendment. They'll just amend it. So they'll just stick another piece of paper on the document that's actually a false document saying my name's Carol.
uh-huh.
When why don't they just go back to the original? But they won't now. So the item California has gotten real weird with this stuff. But still, self ID is still a thing here. The DMV is easy. If you were born in the state, it's easy to change this stuff. It's also easy on federal level to change Social Security. You can just go in with you do have to have your name legally changed in the court. That's the difference. Is your legal name has to be gone through the court, but your gender marker doesn't necessarily need to go through the court.
I find that very weird. To me, it
Yeah.
makes actually more sense to make it easier to change your name because that's just like, whatever subjective. You can name yourself whatever, but sex is like kind of rooted in reality.
You would think. And this kind of thing also makes me think of the the state laws that are we see coming in that want to like the bathroom bills, the state laws that want to make sure that people are using the facilities based on sex and not gender identity, right? And like what I just covered in Odessa, Texas. Okay. Now, the issue is they're trying to fix it from way down here when it needs to be fixed way up here because in the state of Texas only recently did they roll back allowing people to change their sex marker on their ID. You can't anymore, but I don't know what they are requiring people who already did. And in many other states, you're allowed to change your marker. So then how are these laws going to be implemented? Like, for example, if I think this really does apply to lesbians specifically, especially butch lesbians, masculine lesbians. If we often do not have a good time in the women's restroom. Either women get confused and think we're men, or they just are unpleasant. Um, so what happens if I go into a restroom and my sex is questioned and I'm told I go in a women's restroom and I'm told I don't belong there? Do I just show my ID to prove my sex? But if I can just change my ID anywhere, how is that proving my sex? How are they going to implement these laws?
I think that's a good point, and I have always been kind of skeptical of laws, like with a lot of these bathroom laws and bathroom bans, it seems like this is not ever going to be a great way of dealing with the issue. That a lot of the issue, for the way I see it, the issue is we never really had a good grassroots conversation about this topic. Like it was sort of a top-down thing. Like suddenly we decided that there were all this like, you know, trans, equal rights for trans. And there was a wing of progressive advocates who said, okay, you gotta accept this or else you're a bigot,
Mm-hmm.
without like having good communication about, well, what about women's boundaries? What is an acceptable thing to do if you are a woman in a bathroom who feels uncomfortable with a possible man in your bathroom? These conversations didn't happen, or if they happened, there no one in power was, no one who mattered really was listening.
So
Having a law just it seems like these laws without having a good community-based response to it is I don't see how it can work very well.
And this goes back to the self ID, right? If you allow people just to self declare and falsify all their documents, you can't implement anything else. That has to be reversed. You cannot allow people to falsify their documents because that's how they prove who they are. And this is for everything. And I think Candace Jackson has spoken on this, that, you know, women's quote right to female only spaces has never actually been a law. There's no law that actually states this. Am I remembering that correctly?
No, I think that's right. I think that it's something I've heard before that in some sense it was almost an accident that women were and sex-based protection was ever included to begin with. I mean, that the law allowed for women to have these sex-based rights, but it wasn't actually like a right that they had to have. The government could sort of
Well, I think
not
it's
clear
because
what it could do.
this all used to be basically a cultural rule, a cultural understanding, right? It's like you didn't need to make laws necessarily because everybody understood, everybody kind of obeyed the rules. Well, now you come in and you have a small group of people that have decided that they don't want to obey the rules and they actually want to make laws to enforce not obeying the rules, the social contract. That's what I'm thinking of. There's always been a social contract that, you know, men don't go in women's restrooms, or men don't go in women's locker rooms, or whatever, play on women's sports teams.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. That goes back to what I'm saying is like I think a lot of the safeguarding that did happen was not a top down thing, that a lot of it was this just people knew, people had this sort of social contract that like, yeah, of course they're single sex only spaces. Of course women have a right to privacy in their, women's only bathrooms and sports teams and all that. And so now we're in a very weird situation where that sort of social contract is broken. And is it even possible at this point to go back and fix that social contract? Or are we going to now actually have to write laws on the books to address it? In which case, how can we address laws? How can we?
Well,
write these laws.
I think you don't have to necessarily make laws, like you don't have to make bathroom bill laws. You have to make laws not allowing people to change their identity and their sex marker. That's what you have to do. You have to not allow that. And if they don't falsify their stuff, then they're not going to have access to all these spaces. And if they do access these spaces and they get questioned, well, their ID is going to show what's up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's the only way you could really do it. It has to come, there has to be bigger laws above to trickle down.
Yeah, and in the particular case of the US, probably has to be like national. I mean, it because like you said, what if, like California had rules that say you might not have sex-based ID, but Texas says you have to have sex-based ID. It's we're not gonna say you can't California IDs are not gonna be valid. I mean, it creates yeah.
It's yeah, and I do feel I do understand and feel for the frustration of these. I too want sex-based, spaces to stay that way. But you can't just I think you can't just go in and accept any law. You do have to question kind of what this is going to do overall. Is this able to be implemented? And honestly, I'm surprised Germany didn't have this before. I thought they did because they know they've kind of been ahead of the rest of the world in a lot of the trans stuff.
Well, it's interesting the way that different countries seem to be taking different approaches to this. Like, yeah, Germany played a big role in a lot of this, so-called transgender medicine, but so did the Nordic countries. And the Nordic
True.
countries actually are taking a more cautious approach now than Germany or the US for that matter. So I'm one thing that I'm curious about is why is that? Why is it that certain countries are rolling back, taking it a step back and saying, "Oh, we shouldn't go this far." Well, some countries like Germany are now full steam ahead. What's going on in their political system? Is it sort of just an arbitrary thing according to like what activists happen to be popular where? Or is it because there's actually something about the political system that enables it in some countries and not others? It's that to me is a very fascinating sociological question there.
Yeah, I agree. But
Especially
it's a mess.
yeah, and it's interesting because at least it's my perception that Germany overall is probably a more conservative country than the Nordic countries are, but I don't know.
Yeah, that would be my kind of feeling too. But well, maybe that. Yeah, well, the whole trans thing is, I think, regressive and conservative, really at its core, right? So it kind of makes sense.
That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I've it's the same thing. Brazil has some of the most wild trans activism in the world, but they also have some very conservative gender roles there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, all very interesting things. So we'll keep everyone updated on what's going on in the world, what's going on in Germany, what's going on with sports, bathroom laws, and we hope to see you again next week. Remember to like and subscribe.